Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Neha Kunte and I am the CEO of MNK Infotech and chairwoman of ACT. After the success of our webinar on xenophobia, we bring you the Minority Roundtable discussion on allyship, the discussion for racial equity, especially in businesses. We invite representatives from all ethnicities to highlight the collective and individual actions we must take to bring inclusion of diversity. I would like to introduce our panelists, Chris Wallace, President and CEO of North Texas Commission, and Badmus, board member of ACT and owner of Badmus and Associates, Kimberly Shaw, President of Regional Black Contractors Association, and our moderator, Muhammad Farshori, board member and vice chair of ACT. I really tried summarizing their bios, but boy, it was a hard chore. I hope we spend more time on the discussion with them on their outstanding knowledge. I would like to start with Chris Wallace. IOMCCE was named the President and CEO of North Texas Commission in June of 2018. The North Texas Commission is a unique public-private partnership that drives large impactful projects and legislative advocacy, benefiting a robust 13-county region. Prior to joining North Texas Commission, Wallace was president and CEO of Texas Association of Businesses, the State Chamber of Commerce. In his role, he managed TAB's statewide team responsible for legislative advocacy and strategy, operations, membership, marketing, as well as board and chamber relations. As a registered lobbyist, Chris founded the highly recognized and successful Keep Texas Open for Business Coalition. He also serves on the national board of the Business and Industry Political Action Committee. The acronym is BIPAC, and on the Texas Advisory Committee of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Ann Massey Badmus is principal attorney and founder of Badmus and Associates. She represents immigration clients worldwide and believes immigration is the American way and keeps our country strong by the positive contribution of our immigrant business owners, professionals, advocates, and community leaders. As part of her advocacy of immigrants, she founded the Immigrant's Journey Award to spotlight outstanding immigrant contributions. She also founded the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Network to foster and support immigrant entrepreneurship in the US region, and is a partner in the immigrant advocacy organizations, New American Economy, and a member of Dallas Welcoming Community and Immigrant Affairs Task Force. Her advocacy and professional efforts have helped hundreds of clients achieve their American dreams. Anne has authored a book and has been featured on an immigrant expert on numerous TV and radio news programs. Her honors include Best Lawyers in the US List, Best Lawyers in the Dallas by D Magazine, Icons of Humanity, Best Immigration Lawyer of the Year Award. Kimberly Shaw. Kimberly is the President and VP of Operations for the Regional Black Contractors Association. She is a strong organizational leader with a balance of operational and business development acumen, who offers an extensive achievement record proving support to over 100 businesses. An assertive, self-motivated consultant with solid political and community leader relationships. She manages and drives organizational and community programs successfully in cross-team initiatives, achieving growth goals and serving as a change agent. Accomplished in her construction industry with a strong background in solid strategic relationship building, and is identified as a trusted partner. Muhammad Farshori. Muhammad is a valued board member of ACT, diversity leader recognized for his passion for inclusion, diversity, and community engagement. He has successfully led award-winning employee groups at local and national levels, and his efforts have been instrumental in taking nonprofits in the US to new heights. A recipient of Dallas Business Journal's Minority Business Leader Award, Asian Chamber of Texas Diversity Leader Award, and Leadership Dallas Class of 2020 member. In his day job, Mohammed is a director of community engagements at AT&T, responsible for managing, building, and expanding community engagement efforts across the globe. He serves on the advisory board of United Nations Foundation Girl Up Campaign, University of North Texas's Diversity Advisory Board. With that, I give you Mohammed Farshori.
Thanks, Neha. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining. And again, I would like to thank Chris, Ann, and Kimberly for taking the time to be part of this panel, this discussion. You know, the tragic and horrific deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery has, really reignited centuries-long conversation around systemic racism in our country. And many non-Black Americans, they want to stand in solidarity with the Black community, but they don't know how. And that is exactly why we are here today. We're here today to discuss, as Neha mentioned, allyship, and in this historical and challenging times. And I would like to, again, thank everyone for joining, for all the folks who took the time to be part of this conversation. We really appreciate it. And, it's, as you can see the slide, it talks about racism, and that is exactly what we'll be discussing today. I'm not going to go into the entire definition. We all know what racism is. It is wrong, and that's what we're trying to do, make racism wrong. There is not a debate, right? Racism is wrong, there's not a debate, but what we're trying to do is discuss how we all can stand in solidarity, stand together to get rid of this from our lives, our professional lives, our personal lives, and that's what we're going to discuss. So Kimberly and Chris, we all know, the Black Lives Movement Matter is now a global movement. And I personally, I've never seen this type of engagement and response from the communities across the country and the world. I mean, we're seeing news from across the world where, people are protesting and people are, it is, I just saw in the news that, the Black Lives Matter movement has made some, has some products have been impacted in India, even like I'm just seeing it from across the globe. So I would like to get your quick take on how this movement is different from, what we all have seen in the past. So I'd love to take, so Kimberly, I'll start with you.
Sure, thank you, Mohammed. And to answer the question in short, it's different now because I think you have a generation of people who are just plainly sick and tired of the racial injustices. When you look at the history of our culture in America, that's what it was built on. It was built on a racial injustice system for economic gain. And you see these children, and we were talking about this before the airing, but you see children that are a byproduct of this long, deeply rooted history. And now these people are getting caught on social media. There are experts who have taken the time to pull together factual information and show analysis of the disparities and the disproportionate rates of arrests between whites and blacks. It displays the deeply rooted oppression and disenfranchisement of Black people. And so now with that, you have people who are crying out saying, this is not fair, this is not right. You don't have to be Black to realize that, the arithmetic doesn't lie. When we were doing the practice, we talked about playing Monopoly and, comparing it to a game of Monopoly against someone who was given, $400,000 or $4 million, whatever the number is, and you're playing against someone who wasn't given the same amount of money. So how can you play on this equal playing field? So I think now the difference is that you have a lot more people that are awake and that are crying out and being more vocal about the change. You also have, like I said, the social media that's been a big factor in creating awareness. You have live calls and live video footage of people getting caught in the act. You know, we talked about the police officers in Wilmington, North Carolina, who recently were fired from their video calls and their footage with their racist rhetoric. And like you said, it's a global issue now. It's not just something that people in America are seeing. It's globally, it's worldwide. And I'm really pleased to see everyone being so vocal. And I thank all those people who are protesting and doing the hard work of digging deeper to create those changes and look at the policies and the systemic things that we need to take a look at.
Thanks, Kimberly. Definitely gives hope, right? That this, really appreciate it. And what is your take on that, on the global movement that we're seeing? How is it different from what we have seen in the past?
Yeah, so I certainly agree with everything Kimberly has said. I think she summarized it really well. I'm going to come from a little different perspective in terms of the makeup of the US. So, you know, we had the civil rights movement, which was very, very visible, but we didn't have the kind of support from the larger community that I think we're seeing now. So even with the civil rights movement and all the horrific things that you saw then, you know, which was pretty much institutional. It was very clear with Jim Crow and all those things that there was a real issue. Racism was pretty much the norm there. But as a result of the civil rights movement, we saw changes in things like immigration. So I'm going to come back to that because I'm an immigration attorney. And many people may not know that as a result of the civil rights movement, the immigration law was changed in 1965. And because immigration before that was very much, very visibly based on race. The idea was to allow more of those who came from Northern Europe or Europe and keep the other countries, Asia, Africa, Latin America, keep those numbers down. And so it was very, very difficult for anyone who wasn't white to immigrate to the US. So with the civil rights movement, soon after the Voting Rights Act was enacted, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was enacted, which eliminated race-based immigration. Now, I won't say that it's entirely clean of that. I still think there's a lot of discrimination and disparate impact in the system, but that really opened the door for immigration that we see today, where we see people from Asia, Latin America, and Africa, where now when we think of immigration, that's who we think of. If I tell someone that I'm working for someone who's from Europe, they're like, really? Is that really happening? So they don't see, they think immigration are from those countries, and that's fine. But I think with having that diversity that we have now, where we are a much more diverse nation, we see more and more people who are exposed to different cultures and now see how it actually become more forceful in terms of wanting to see equality. And when we're seeing things like this happen, we're just not going to be the same with that.
This is some great information. And you know, a lot of people don't realize that, especially folks who migrated recently, let's say the 90s and, you know, the 2000s, they don't realize that someone fought for their civil rights, for them to be citizens in this country, to be able to vote, to be able to own property, all of that stuff. Thank you for highlighting that. That's so important for folks to know, that, you know, it's the value of this freedom that they have. You know, you land like me, I'm a very privileged minority. I came to this country, started getting a job, and I'm here, you know. No one's stopping me from doing anything, but totally understand. Chris, your take on this, on what you're seeing.
Mohammed, thank you very much. Let me first thank you, Mohammed, Neha, and Susan for the great work you do for the Chamber. I applaud you for hosting today's session to have this crucial conversation. Just to add to a little bit about the good words that we just heard from Kimberly and Ann, you know, we have a lot of, in my perspective, a lot of healing to do in our country, in our state, in our region. our hearts certainly go out to those families who have been directly impacted. You know, this is really an awakening. What is happening now is we are implementing slowly, I think, real change that is well overdue. And that gives me hope. I think that is the key word that I keep going back to, is that gives me hope. But we all have a lot of work to do, and we have to take action. We cannot just be allies, we have to be allies of action. We must now take individual responsibility to make sure that we are intentional. We have to be intentional about fighting against racial inequities. So I look forward to our discussion today. I'm going to be sharing a lot of data. We pour through a lot of data here at the Commission, and as we move policy at the state and federal levels that benefit our region. And there's a lot of new data out there. There's a lot of new studies out there that I'm going to be certainly referring to. I'll put some in the chat box. There's a lot of new data on the business case for racial inequity. There's a lot of new data on how to be good white allies. I'm going to be talking a lot about that as well. So I look forward to this discussion.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And I mean, it's a great segue into our next question. What does it mean to be an ally? As Chris, you mentioned, I'll start with Kimberly. Kimberly, we're all allies to, people around us. I'm an LGBTQ ally, I'm a male ally. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to be an ally from your end?
Sure. Well, one of the things, and I can just speak from my position, something that's most people may not know is that I am a biracial product. So my mother is from Hooks, Texas, a small, town in Texas, which we know Texas is historically was last to be segregated or integrated rather, free. And then I have a father and one side of my family from South Carolina, where, slavery was just very, very prominent. So, and he went to one of the first integrated schools in South Carolina in 1965. So what I would say, and I say that because I want to bring into context, growing up my whole life, I've had to learn how to be a good ally to both sides, Black and white, make sure that I'm, not just looking at things one-sidedly. You have to take in perspective, just like we're talking about now, having this discussion, being a good listener, not thinking that you know everything, because sometimes the way you feel has been shaped from your upbringing, vice versa. So I definitely, just on a more general context, I would say, being a good listener, hearing that other person out, hearing the other groups out that you're working with. You can never go into any relationship one-sided. So never go, when you're an ally, never go into any type of new relationship expecting to get something out of it. I would say figuring out ways that you can help others and serve others is probably the biggest part of being a good ally. And what you're seeking, you'll get in return naturally and organically based off of developing that relationship. So those are just some of my, key points of being a good ally. And also being clear about, your outcomes and your goals that you want to achieve, but also having the flexibility to again, understand other people's viewpoints and respect those. And I wouldn't call them compromises, I call them solutions. So finding solutions to build bridges and work together. I had a wonderful class with ULI, the Urban Land Institute, and you really focus on trade-offs because there's no perfect model. There's no perfect ending, but you'd have a lot of trade-offs. And so I would encourage that when you're dealing with allies and building ally relationships to be okay with having some trade-offs. and just being flexible to understanding other people's perspectives and viewpoints.
Those are great points, Kimberly. And, listening is so important right now, especially for folks who are not Black.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, a lot of people have personal opinions about things they have read, a video they may have watched, which kind of aligns with what they think, and people immediately jump to conclusions. So I think I totally agree with the point of, being flexible, but also I think that my biggest takeaway from what you said was listen. We all need to just, just don't say anything, but just listen first.
And not be defensive,
Yeah.
be defensive. I think I shared this in the practice run where, you start talking about this race thing, and the first thing that some of my white counterparts will do is throw up their one Black friend that they have, to kind of vouch that they're not racist, that's their badge of honor. Well, I've got a best friend that's Black, or I had a Black best man in my wedding, and it's not, that actually can be more upsetting to some, because they read through, not that there's any ill intention behind the comments, but it's almost like it's bigger than just your one Black friend, sir.
Yeah. That's such a good point, right? I mean, it's your experience is your experience. It's not my experience. So when you're telling me you experienced something, I just need to listen.
Right.
You're saying, no, it doesn't. It never happens, right? Yeah, it doesn't happen to me, but thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Listening is so important. And what does it mean to be an ally?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So to me, I think all the things, again, as Kimberly says, because she's really great in summarizing that, but really it comes to education to me, being willing to educate yourself. Again, listening is very important, and your personal relationships with people, and if you're hearing from others some things that do not necessarily, are you might consider to be stereotypical comments, comments about people that are stereotypical, or you might even say racist, being willing to correct that perception, or at least educate them, but also to educate yourself, and not depend on your Black friends to educate you, but go out there and learn. There's plenty of literature, there's plenty of things, information out there. We have more information at our fingertips than we've ever had. And so learning about that and being willing to learn about that, about those things is very important. And also advocating for your children, not advocating for your children to be educated about these things. And when I say you, of course, have your own responsibility for that, but our school system is not, is really not, does not really teach education broadly, or does not teach about other cultures other than the Western culture, pretty much. So just to give you an example, my daughter is in high school, senior in high school, and she has a world history class, but the world history is about European history and maybe a little bit of Asian history, okay? Nothing about African history. So when she asked about that, one of her classmates said, well, what is there to know about it? There's nothing in African history. So that to me continues to perpetuate the same kinds of attitudes that we see from my era. I grew up actually in North Carolina, just to give you some background of myself, and I'm also biracial. So my mother is Korean and I'm African-American. My father was in the military, and when we returned to his hometown in North Carolina, where his family had been for centuries, we can trace our roots back to 1700s. We were in a very segregated town, and I went to a segregated school because in 1970, we were still not segregated in North Carolina. So I am, someone who actually has gone through a segregated system, experienced some Jim Crow, and of course my parents have as well. So it's really, to me, the thing that I realized is that I didn't know anything about my history growing up. I didn't learn anything about my history. And when I say my history, I mean Black history, okay? I didn't learn anything about that until I educated myself. And I see that nothing's really changed. There's really not been any changes in our system of education. And I think, I as a Black parent can advocate for that, but we need allies to advocate for that too. We need people from other cultures, from the white community, the Asian community, to also advocate for that. to advocate that we really educate our kids, all our kids, not just our Black kids about Black history, but all of our kids about Black history, so that they know that there's other cultures out there and that they respect them on the same equal level.
Thanks, and thank you so much for sharing that personal experience. I'm sure a lot of people must be shocked that schools were still, segregated. Because I know that Dallas ISD, I think, was desegregated by force in the 70s too. People, who are still alive, people probably still in the system who fought for that to not happen, right? That, like, I can't even imagine. And then and you're so right about educating yourself and also educating the next generation. And that's a great way to create next generation allies. And with the power of social media, with the new generation who have that right on their access, like they're not dependent on one institute to learn or a book to learn. They have access to the world to hear a different viewpoint, which is good and bad at the same time, but at least they have that access. So we'll get into that conversation on the how we're going to do that, but thank you for sharing that. And Chris, would love to hear your take on what does it mean to be an ally. You kind of talked about it a little bit, but I would love to hear more.
Yeah, you bet. No, and just to give a little bit more in terms of my personal reflection, having been in this space for a while of having crucial conversations about ending racism with my very diverse group of friends, and hopefully we all are, to build on what Kimberly was saying, we are surrounding ourselves with a very diverse group of friends. And I am blessed to have a very diverse group of friends, and I have family members of color. And I will tell you, the last couple of months, I'm realizing that I've got a lot of work to do. I have much still to learn. I need to listen more. I need to educate myself more. I need to become more intentional about speaking out. When I am in settings where something is said inappropriately, I need to do a better job of speaking out. I've been having these types of conversations now the last several weeks with several of my friends of color, and let me just kind of share with you some of their thoughts of what they're saying. And we heard some of this before from some of the other panelists. Listen to us. They're saying educate yourself, find out about me. They're saying respect me. They're saying be genuinely concerned, to understand me, to, as Ann said, teach your children about racism. They're saying talk to other white people about conscious bias and unconscious bias, and stand by my side for what is right. And they're also saying to speak up, and not just when it's convenient, but speak up on a daily basis. So I've got a lot of work to do to be an active ally, not just one that says you're an ally, but to be an active ally.
That's a great point. Active ally, I love that word, right? It's very easy to go and post something on social media saying that I support this or go attend a protest, but how are you an active ally, right? I mean, that's such a great point. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. And listening, educating, respecting, and I think very important is to understand the issue exists. A lot of people are still in denial, like, oh, it doesn't exist. Yeah, it doesn't exist for you, but it does for others. So I think denial is definitely one more thing that I've noticed a lot of people do. So, the next point I want to jump into is, a lot of people are hesitant to be allies because they're not comfortable. They don't know what is good or what is bad. So maybe Kimberly, I'll start with you on the do's and don'ts of an ally. Like, what is your take? I know there's, if someone is genuinely trying to be an ally, there's nothing wrong with that. But people would love to hear, people who want to be genuine allies, what are the do's and don'ts that you suggest for being an ally?
Sure. Well, like Chris mentioned, just acknowledging that there's a piece of education there that you have to take into account. So obviously being open to understanding, like he just said, open to understanding that there's some work that both of us are going to have to do, because I'll be the first to admit that there are some prejudices within the Black culture towards the white culture as well, because of all of, you know, the things that have been put into our minds growing up as well. You know, my grandparents did not accept me as a child until I was, you know, 6 years old. So there were some things there that I also had to internally say, I forgive that. It was from your, you know, your own ignorance. It was from your upbringing. At the same time, my white colleagues and counterparts and family members have to say, there are some things that I don't know that I do need to educate myself on. And, you know, times have changed and this was wrong. But I saw a comment go by about, it said white guilt. And, you know, you do have to get past that, because if you don't truly feel like that on the inside, if you don't have prejudice in your heart, you shouldn't feel guilty about anything. You should feel, you know, it shouldn't feel like you're, and I wonder this too about my mother. Sometimes I always thought, you know, when we're having these hard conversations, and she has to think about what her culture has done towards Black people, how does that make her feel? And to have Black children. And those have been sensitive conversations also, you know, but to take yourself out of it and say, I'm not a part of, I shouldn't be blamed for this. I just want to be a part of helping it be better. And like what Chris said, you know, the thing to be an ally, a good ally, is speaking up behind closed doors when you're in a position of leadership to make change. When you have an active voice and you have a role to say something, call it out. Don't be afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations, even if you're the only one speaking up for it, because 9 times out of 10, there are other people that might feel that way too, but they're too scared to say it. So they're waiting on someone to make it okay to have that, you know, discussion. And so, you know, the do's and don'ts, I would say, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to have the uncomfortable conversations. Do some inward reflection, and tell yourself it's okay. You know, I shouldn't feel guilty for what has been done, because I don't feel like this. I want to be a part of the solution. I'm not a part of the problem. And, you know, do support, and this is kind of going into what you can do, but do support those organizations and really invest your time and energy into that impactful change. Don't just, you know, say you're going to be about it, but actually be out there, you know, and let your talk do the walk, or your walk do the talk, however that goes. But just be about it, you know. So
thank you so much, Kimberly. I mean, you know, very good takeaways. Like, don't feel guilty, but and become part of the solution. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? You know, just acknowledge that there is an issue and just play the role. And you made a point about, you know, what you do when you're the only person in the room with the other person who may be unconsciously or consciously biased towards the community, right? It's like, if I'm a male ally and someone is, you know, if I don't see enough female representation, I don't need a female in the room to point out that there is no female. I need to speak up. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And what are some of the do's and don'ts of being an ally?
I'm sorry. Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I'm unmuted. So in thinking about this, you know, one of the things that we kind of think of when we think of racism is, you know, it's something overt, you know, that we, you know, someone says something that we think is racist, or, you know, I'm not like that because I don't do those kinds of things, or I don't say those kinds of things. But I think to be an ally, you really have to look at yourself and try to uncover the biases in yourself, number one, because we all have them. we all do. So when you are listening and hearing information from, whether it's from the internet or wherever you hear that, or speaking with someone, think about, how am I coming from? Am I looking at this or am I listening to this person and not having my own biases towards that? Because oftentimes, as we talked about before, or someone said before, we hear things that happen and we're like, well, I wouldn't handle it that way. If I was stopped by the cops, I'd be really good and no one, I wouldn't be bothered. Okay, nothing would happen to me. And it's because your perspective is a little different, but also you're not really putting yourself in that person's shoes. So I think that's number one, is to try to eliminate those biases that you have in yourself. I will say, and I just want to bring this up because I am part Asian, is that, from the Asian community, as Kimberly mentioned, I've, dealt with biases on both sides. From the Asian community, even my own family, there was a little bit of shame of having, not my mother, of course, but my aunts and uncles, and having my mother married to a Black man with Black children. So when we were in New York, at least one distinct memory that I have is that my aunt and uncle had a store in the Korean community. A lot of Black people that patronized their stores, but they did not want us to come to the store because they did not want to know in their Asian community, or people to know in their Asian community, that they had relatives who were Black. So that's changed somewhat, but I think that it's very important that the Asian community as well looks at the biases, and also in the Black community as well. There are some biases there as well, but those are the things that I think is really important. And I don't have a lot of do's and don'ts. It's really mainly to check your own biases.
Thanks, Anne. And a lot of people don't realize that I don't think there's anyone out there without a bias. We all have it. Like, you could be the most perfect person, but you may have some kind of unconscious bias. And there's so many amazing trainings out there for folks who may not know what it is. I would highly recommend to go and learn about conscious and unconscious bias. We all have it. You'd be lying to yourself if you say, I don't have any kind of bias. We all do. It doesn't matter what community, what nationality, what race, we all have some kind of bias. So thanks for pointing that out, and really appreciate you sharing that personal story too, highlighting how there is bias in almost every community. We have similar stories in the Asian Indian community, South Asian community, it's everywhere. So thanks for sharing that. Chris?
Yeah, you bet. Mohammed, you mentioned there's a lot of resources out there. One that a colleague of mine shared with me recently, the guidelines for being strong white allies. It was adapted from Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Social Justice. It's written by Paul Keeble. I encourage you to look it up. I'll post the reference here in the chat here momentarily. But let me just kind of walk you through five do's and a couple of don'ts. Some that I just highlighted. One is to assume racism is everywhere, every day. Just like economics influences everything we do, gender politics influences everything we do. Assume that racism is affecting your daily life. I cannot imagine having to worry about basic human rights every day that my Black friends worry about. Two, in terms of a do, is understand and learn the history of whiteness and the history of racism. It's pretty overwhelming once you dive into it. That's a whole another webinar. Another one is do stand against injustice. It was brought up, I think Anne mentioned it, is that we, even though it's uncomfortable, we have to intervene at times and take risk, even though it's uncomfortable to do so. Do talk to your children, do talk to young people about racism and what is racism, as the first slide as we started today started with. Do consistently support leadership of people of color. Many of you are probably aware, but of our Fortune 500 companies, as far as leadership positions, are those on their board of directors, 18% are of color. So we still have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do right here at the North Texas Commission. So a couple of don'ts. Don't do it by yourself. We need to build coalitions. We need to join those already existing groups. We need to join those networks that are already established and support them financially, support them with our time and our resources. And another don't is don't assume that you know what's best for the other person. I found that one particularly as we deal with a lot of legislative issues. Don't assume you know what's best for a person of color. You need to ask them. You need to bring them to the table and give them the microphone and listen to what they have to say. So those are a couple of do's and don'ts that I found that I'm going to try to practice more of, and I hope everybody listening to this will as well.
Muhammad, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you for pointing that out. So thanks, Chris. Appreciate your take on that, and for sharing those sources. And if you can put some of the resources in the chat, that'll be great.
Sure.
I'll kind of combine my two questions that I was planning on asking today, and then maybe in the next few minutes we'll jump into Q&A with the audience. So questions for anyone, Kimberly, and Chris, you guys, anyone can join in, but can start. What are some of the things the attendees on this call can do to become strong Black community allies in their professional and personal life? Because we have a lot of chambers, corporations, business leaders on the call. And what message would you like to give to them on what they should start doing starting today to be better allies? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
I'll be happy to jump in. Another good reference point, and I'll post it as well in the chat, is Brent Underwood, a good friend of mine who's the head of diversity and inclusion for Celanese Corporation. We're thankful they're right here in North Texas, their headquarters. He shared with me 75 things that white people can do for racial justice. And if you go to medium.com and some of those other sources on the equity inclusion section, you'll see some of this. But and I hope that Kimberly will comment on this. But support Black businesses. Call her; she can tell you. Support Black businesses. Ensure that your own HR departments, your own staff, your own leadership look like a representation of those that you serve, those customers in which you serve. Make sure that your staff, your board of directors looks like that as well. Reassure that when we're talking about doing and not just talking about racial injustices and how we combat them, but a lot of it goes into policy making. What we're hearing now, thankfully, in Congress, what we're going to be hearing in the next legislative session, the 87th session of the Texas legislature, we're going to hear a lot about criminal justice reform. We're going to hear a lot about bail reform. And so I encourage you to go to the 75 things that white people can do for racial justice. And there's a whole list of legislative policies. I know we are diving into them here at the commission. It could be as simple as reading books. The article says to decolonize your bookshelf, which I love that, to help educate yourself. It could be watching movies that would inspire you, not only in terms of educate you in terms of the history via a movie, but would inspire you to act and inspire your kids to act as well. So that's just a few from the article that I read recently that was shared. And I'll post that resource as well.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm seeing a lot of entertainment companies doing the right thing, by opening the platform for, highlighting movies, showing the plight of the Black community, or, promoting Black directors and actors and, their stories. So people really get to see, and a lot of historical documentaries, about Dr. King's life, Malcolm X and the Civil Rights Movement, So, and Juneteenth, I mean, which got so much attention this year, which I don't think it ever had in this country, right? Because, it's something that was so important, but a lot of people never, they just didn't grow up, getting, hearing about it in schools or work. I mean, even in corporate life, no one actually celebrates it, but I think it's definitely heading in the right direction where people have started talking about it, the importance of Juneteenth, and how people are are like Happy Freedom Day, and seeing all those messages, and it was getting a lot of attention, and I'm glad that that's happening.
A lot of it, Mohammed, is just asking questions, right?
Yeah.
I think we can draw attention to issues if we ask the questions. Why do Black men get paid 13% less? And Black women get paid 39% less than white men.
Wow.
A lot of our companies today. Do you realize that's going on today? 2020? Somebody with the same job, all because of color of the skin, gets paid less? We need to ask these questions within our own organizations. And there are good companies out there, many, thankfully, right here in North Texas, like the AT&Ts of the world, that are doing some great things, that are addressing these issues, that have been addressing these issues for years. We need to pay attention to them, and take their best practices, and make sure that we have them in our own organizations, with everybody who's represented on this call today.
Yeah. And Chris, I would like to chime in too, and say, to your point about criminal justice reform and why that's so important, I challenge everyone to go on Netflix, and Ava DuVernay has a really good documentary about the disproportionate rate of arrest and the criminal justice system to whites and blacks. It's called The 13th. On Netflix, and it will give you some really good historical data behind why there's so many Black men incarcerated in prison. And we've all seen over the last couple of years a lot of men who were wrongly convicted that were let go or released from prison based off of DNA findings. And of course, they'll give them money, but it goes back to the principle of they were wrongly imprisoned. And a lot of it had to do with they were mistaken for another Black person. And so their years of their lives have been ripped away from them. It's done so much damage to them mentally, their family units. There's so many other impacts that go into that. So anyway, I challenge everyone to look at that documentary on Netflix. One of the things that the RBCA is doing and has been really passionate about is the Second Chance Hiring Program. And we provide training, educational opportunities for individuals who have a criminal background. Some of these men and ladies that we work with, they could be as small as, a marijuana charge from 1990, and they're unable to get a good paying job in 2020 because of something they did years ago. And I mean, how many people, myself included, I mean, when you're in your 20s, you do some stupid things. Luckily, I just never got caught, right? So, but that's not the case for everybody. And unfortunately, because of, again, that disproportionate rate of arrest, Black to white, there are men and women who go to jail more frequently for smaller crimes, and they don't have the finances to have an attorney. They don't have bail money to get out, and so they sit there for years. They also don't have, again, the finances to afford a good attorney, so they plead guilty and accept a plea deal, and then you have a record, and that you're set back. So anyway, the program, we're really passionate about it. Our training partner is Dallas County Community College District. We're working with Tarrant County College District as well to implement. They have a lot of programs that are already in place, but we're working with them to have some short courses formed for these men and women from underserved communities to go in and get this training. And then from there, we partner them with companies who have employment opportunities. To your point, Chris, we've had to go in at the policy level and have advocates, at the county commissioners level, city council level, to change policies to say that if you have a misdemeanor or felony, you can still work here with certain restrictions. Of course, there's still vetting requirements and criteria, but whereas before it was just no, you could not work here. Now we're seeing a lot more flexibility in hiring practices and giving second chances. So I would encourage, everyone on the call to spread that word. We intake about 24 men and women every 4 weeks to go through this program. And it's really, they're getting driver's license, rehabilitating their family units. And so that's just one of the things that I would challenge you. And then like Chris said, just doing work with Black contractors, Black businesses. That's what we advocate for day in and day out. We're working with city leaders and officials and people in decision-making positions to change their current practices and create policies that make it less rigid and easier for smaller minority-owned businesses, Black businesses to do work with public agencies and private. Private also has to do a better job of working with Black business.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks. Appreciate you sharing that. Anne? You're on mute.
I got it now. Okay. Yeah, so there are, as far as what we can do personally or even as an organization, there are a lot of alliances that we could make with other organizations with similar goals. I think as Kimberly mentioned before, you can ally with other chambers, other Black chamber, other chambers that are focused on helping with the Black community. Also, there's a ton of nonprofit organizations for social justice, racial justice out there that you can find one that allies with what your goals are. So I think just reaching out to the community, to the Black community, because there's a lot of resources out there, and if we have the more people we can have to join with the goals that we have to eliminate racial injustice, the more likely that we hopefully will get there one day.
Thanks, Anne. And and that is the whole purpose, right? I mean, regardless of what race we all belong to, I mean, we all want to create an environment where we can bring our authentic self to work in our society, right? And that is the goal for everyone. It's yes, right now there is one community that is suffering more than others, and that's why the whole focus is to make sure we uplift the Black community. Because the more I'm reading about it, the more I am learning and educating myself as an ally. That's the first thing. I'm at the very early stage of my ally phase where I'm right now educating myself, like learning about and it starts local. Like, I don't want to read the entire history of every state. I live in Dallas. I just need to understand what was Dallas's history, right? At one point, Dallas was, considered a very racist city, because if you look at the history of, how the fair used to have a Klan day, and, we had redlinings, we had South Dallas bombings, where if a Black community, if a Black family would move into a nicer neighborhood, the Klan would go and bomb their house and things like that. When you start reading that, and how South Dallas just went down when, the other population, the other communities started prospering, whereas some other neighborhoods just are still not able to pull themselves up. And, I'm learning about Plano. I live in Plano. So I'm learning how when Plano was inviting people to come and live and settle in Plano, Plano was giving 300 some acres of land to the white head of the family, just to come and move at a time where Black men and women were not even allowed to be free. So that leaves people with disadvantages. I mean, think about it. Even when they got freedom, they didn't have jobs. You know, no one was hiring them. They didn't have equal, you know, I mean, think about the 18th century. So I think there's so much that people have to learn to understand the why and the what behind it. Because it's very easy to say, oh, we don't have racism these days. We don't, you know, people have rights. Yeah, but you have to understand that, you know, it's a ripple effect. It impacts jobs, it impacts family, it impacts, you know, the youth, it impacts everything. You know, so it's you know, the poverty, health. I mean, you look at any point, and like I have heard this from someone that if the U.S. gets a fever, the Black community in the U.S. gets pneumonia. That's how badly it impacts the Black community. So I really, really appreciate you all taking the time and sharing this amazing, you know, resources and your viewpoint on how we can become better allies and, you know, stand up against this fight for, you know, we're trying to get to racial equality and justice for the Black community. So thank you all for sharing that. I think we can open up for Q&A. We had one question that I liked. It was from, I think, Abdul. His question was, what is the role of corporation and why were they asleep all this time?
I think most have been working in this space for a while now. Perhaps they're not bragging about it enough, and that's where we got to do a better job, and others as well to take those best practices and brag on their behalf. Now, some to be fair, some have not, and I think. To get back to Mohammed, your very first question, how this movement is different than what we saw back perhaps in the early to mid 60s. From what people tell me back then, it was not a lot of action. Obviously, there was some from a legislative point, but as far as business community leaders speaking up, you have more of those now. We have a lot of corporation leaders within our region who are speaking up, who are on the front line of this issue, who are establishing ERGs inside their companies, who are very, very effective at influencing what the brand and what the consumer spending power is, what the marketing strategy is of the company. We found that in the last two legislative cycles. We're finding it in Congress today. So thankfully, I think more and more research and data that's out there where it makes sense. Not only, of course, is it the right thing to do? Yes, but also makes sense from a business case, from an economics case within the company.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. And I think we have only 3 minutes left, so I'm going to, you know, request Susan to jump in because we wanted to share some resources with the folks on the call today. Again, thank you, Kimberly and Ann and Chris, for your time and for sharing your great insights. And you know, hopefully we'll continue this conversation. And thank you again, Susan and Neha, for hosting this and, you know, for putting this together, and Divya. So Susan, back to you to share the resources.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to thank everybody on this panel. Kimberly, Ann, Chris, Mohammed, and of course, Neha, our chairman. I want to just commend you for the efforts that you have taken into this fight and this collaborative effort to start the conversation and continue the conversation because it's an important one. And, you know, the Asian Chamber of Texas, we're dedicated to equity in all areas. I mean, a business is one of our big ones, but, you know, it's social inequity as well. And we want to make sure that we're loud and we state it very clearly that we stand with the Black community on this topic, and we will continue to do so and fight that fight with you. You know, it's racial injustice is, you know, it's not always, even the way that, you know, the minorities are treated, we're all treated slightly differently, and we know that, and it's not okay. So that said, you know, we stand with you, but stay tuned. I want to invite all of you to continue following us. This recording, this webinar is recorded, and we will be posting it on our social media websites as well as our website. And we will be following up with an email with all the resources that have been given to us today. Mohammed and Chris and Ann and Kimberly have given us fantastic list of different books, different movies, TED Talks, just links to different articles that have been posted. So education is key here. The more we know, the more we're able to understand and see where we can actually make a difference in fighting, so we don't run into the same issue historically, the same systemic issues that rise every time. We're able to catch it next time and make some changes. And we will continue bringing those to light. That's our effort, and that's our promise to you. Divya, can you go ahead and move to the next screen, please? So this, I'm moving on to another subject. This is a brand new effort that the City of Dallas has made in efforts to be a resource hub or resource center for everything related to COVID. So anything and everything that you want to know, whether it's, you know, the current policies, the different types of loans that are available through different banking systems, the PPP program, best practices when you're trying to return to normal, the new normal with your business, all of that and more can be found in this website. So you can, I think we're going to be sending out this along with another email with all the information that you'll need. But I want to once again thank you all for coming, and please stay tuned to our next series of webinars as we continue throughout. I think we're going to probably start it back up in August. So until then, take care, everyone. Peace be to everybody. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.